Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Logos Project. This is your host, Dom. And in today's video, I'm continuing the tradition of making videos about the books I have read in the last couple months. I started off making these videos once a month, and then it just turned out to be once every 2 months. Um, I didn't read as many books in the last 2 months because I have still been making my way through that 800-page book on Blondel, which I have about 200 pages left. It's I'm definitely glad that I chose to read that one. It's going to be a landmark book. I have it all marked up, but it's taken me a while. I'm also translating a series of books from the French. Of course, I'm availing myself of today's technology to make the process as fast as possible. But that does take a lot of time, and I'll talk about those books in just a bit. Of course, I am not going to be distributing those because this is just a private project. I'm translating it so I can make a copy for myself in English and I can show it to a friend, but not distribute it or what have you, because I don't have the rights to do that. So I won't be doing that. But I'll talk about that in just a bit. But I did read a few books, especially in the first month. Let's see, what months are these? May and June, right? In May, I read quite a few. So I'll just go ahead and start with the first one I read in May, and this was by Joseph Pieper, The Silence of St. Thomas. I did a video, I think, on part of it. I don't think I brought this book up last video. I hope I didn't, but I'm pretty sure I read this in May. Anyway, it's a really great book. I really loved the middle section. It's broken into three parts. You could say there are three large chapters. The first one is about St. Thomas, his context. The second one is about the doctrine of creation, its implications, some of its implications. And the last one is about Thomism. Fascinating chapter. Is there such a thing? What Pieper thinks about that. It's just a great book, The Silence of St. Thomas. Pieper is very quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. I've been going through a lot of his books, and I have some queued up for the next couple months that I'll be talking about in the next video like this. The next book I read by Pieper, and I've already done several videos on it, so you guys won't be surprised if you've been following the channel, is Guide to Thomas Aquinas by Joseph Pieper. This one, honestly, I was surprised at how good it was. Not that I expected it not to be good, because Pieper is always awesome. I just expected it to be much more encyclopedic in the sense of information about St. Thomas, but it was actually, I mean, it was that, but it was just so much more. It was about his historical context, but the impact that has on his writing, on his thinking, situating him not just, you might say, purely historically, but intellectually in the history of philosophy and theology. Um, why he's so important, how he writes, about his writing, like the Latin he uses. It's just a great book. I still need to do one video about this. I have one left. Um, if someone wants to get into St. Thomas Aquinas and they're new to philosophy or theology, Catholic philosophy or Catholic theology, and everyone knows that St. Thomas Aquinas is uh, probably the central figure of Catholic thinking, you might say. I would recommend they start here. I think at one point I made a post, this is before I read this, that people should start with this one. And it's a very good one. I would say do this one second, right? But I would actually say start with this one, Guide to Thomas Aquinas. This is, I think, the best place to start if you want to um, learn more about St. Thomas. Don't. So this is, some people will disagree with me, but I would say don't start with the Summa. Do not start reading the Summa. I don't think that's a good idea. Um, if you really want to start directly with the texts of St. Thomas, I would say go to his commentaries on Scripture. Then I would say read this, right? And then you can read certain articles of the Summa. You have to be judicious in picking out which ones. Um, but honestly, I would recommend reading Norris Clark's The One of the Many before diving deep into the Summa. But yeah, I would start here. I really would. So two great books. And Thanks, person in the chat, a contemplative reader. I really appreciated your videos on Aquinas, which used Pieper as a resource. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, Pieper is just so awesome. I just love the way he does philosophy. I think there's a simplicity and a depth to Pieper that is just so refreshing. Sometimes some philosophers are just so complicated and it almost seems unnecessarily so. You have some that are complicated, but like it's justifiable. Like I would argue Blondel, extreme. Like I tried reading L'Action, I struggled, but I think for him it's justifiable. He's tackling all of these modern and ancient philosophies. I mean, he's a great. And then you have some philosophers who um it's not that they're complicated, but, like, they're rather superficial. They're just kinda repeating things, kind of, summarizing what other philosophers think, and sometimes they don't do justice to them, and then they try to respond, and they're not actually listening to the people they're disagreeing with, and I find them to be shallow, right? Pieper is a beautiful blend of simplicity and depth, and that's usually a sign of a true philosopher. It's a sign of humility. It's very Socratic, right? And it shows you usually that there's a genuine wisdom there. So Joseph Pieper is always a plus. I don't think I've ever read anything by Joseph Pieper that let me down. I don't think that's ever happened. The next book I read this again in May, was The Nature and Mission of Theology by Joseph Ratzinger. What can I say? Ratzinger's always a win. I mean, it's again, like many of Ratzinger's works, this is a compilation of various articles and essays that he's written that are unified that are put together on the basis of a unified theme. And the theme, of course, is theology. There's some very important chapters in here about the relationship between theology and philosophy, the early church's understanding of Christianity as the philosophy, what that meant, what it means, the history of the relationship between both philosophy and theology, the crisis that developed, moving forward. How do they relate? Questions about authority, church authority, things like that. Just fantastic. It's Ratzinger. Like, there's nothing bad I can say. Ratzinger's always a win. Speaking of Ratzinger, the other book I read him, uh, I think this one I read early June. I was surprised. I thought it was going to be much more disparate and miscellaneous than it actually was. And this is What is Christianity? The Last Writings, right? A compilation of the last things he wrote as he was Pope Emeritus before he died. It was absolutely fantastic. There are some crucial passages in here. It's much more miscellaneous and less unified, but like genuine gems, like just fantastic passages that I'm already using some of them in one of the classes I teach. Just fantastic. I really loved this one. It's definitely a go-to. I've already been using it as a resource. Um, I just, you know, this whole channel kind of for a long time started to revolve around Ratzinger because I've just read so much of Ratzinger. And you'd think, after a while, I'd get kind of like, all right, time to move on to something else. And in a certain sense, I kind of have to move on to other thinkers if I want to be well rounded in my theological studies. But honestly, like Ratzinger's just never become outdated for me. Like every time I read him, I'm just never disappointed. There's always something there. And I oftentimes go back to some of his texts that I've already read because I'm working on a project or something, and something new pops up every time I reread, the same text. Um, there's just, I mean, I think, I've said this before. I think he will be a doctor of the church. There's just a freshness. There's just a relatability. He asks the same questions that I have, and he responds beautifully. There's a synthesis, right? There's a synthetic approach. There's a beauty. There's a harmony. There's an analogy between all the mysteries. He's just amazing, and I'll never tire. I think of his writings. And he's kind of, I leaned on him as a guide navigating a lot of questions, and kind of like as he's like the Virgil, right? I'm Dante here, trying to figure my way through a lot of messy questions. and he's definitely been kind of like the sturdy guide next to me. And as I go through, a lot of de Lubac, I've been spending a lot of time with Pieper, and now I'm finally starting to wade into the Blondels and the Ulrichs, the more difficult writers. I feel like Ratzinger's always there by my side. Thanks to him, I'm able to understand that stuff. If that makes sense. Okay, another book I read. This one I read in June. It was really good, of course. I talked about being on a Pieper bender. I'm kind of on a Lewis bender as well. The Screw Tape Letters, of course, right? Just delightful. Three of my favorite letters were letter 8. Let me go ahead and pull it up here. Letter 8. Letter, I think it's 23, is it? Yep, 23. And the last one might have been 26. What is it? 27. So 8, 23, and 27. I just marked those. They really stick out to me as the best 3 of the book, at least right now for me, right? But it's just a fantastic book. You'd think it's a quaint parody about a demon, like a comedy about a demon writing about his failed attempts at tempting someone, but it's just so much more than that. Lewis really has a way to present in simple language a vision of the whole, right? That is so intuitive and perspicacious, right? I mean, it's funny because I've appreciated Lewis more and more the more I've been reading Ratzinger, and recently I've been reading some Balthasar, but I haven't finished anything yet. That's why he's not featured in any of my videos yet. I've been chipping away at some of his books, but Lewis really is a kind of popular precursor to some of these greats, right? Kind of like, I've been meaning to make a video on this, but there's an incredible similarity between G.K. Chesterton and Henry de Lubac. They're both enamored with the idea of paradox. And there's so many different threads that I've discovered that run through both Chesterton and de Lubac. There's a fascinating kinship there, and I don't think either of them knew anything about each other. If anything, de Lubac knew about Chesterton, but I haven't come across anything that says that shows that. But that's something that's fascinating. And with Lewis, I mean, I don't know yet enough about the kind of sweeping vision of Balthasar. In fact, I'm going to be making a video with a Balthasar scholar soon. We'll talk a little bit about Balthasar's theology of freedom, of redemption, of creation, his kind of metaphysics overall. He has a kind of structure of his approach. From the little I know, Lewis reminds me a lot of Balthasar, and Chesterton reminds me a lot of de Lubac. But Lewis and Chesterton more at the popular level. And I'm not. This is not a dig. Like, Lewis is actually a real scholar. I read a few months ago, as you guys know, if you've been watching these videos, I read The Abolition of Man, and I mean, that's a very serious work. But of course, Lewis, Chesterton, and well, I have a complicated relationship with Belloc, but they're definitely not like these giant academic theologians like Balthasar and Ratzinger, and I mean, it's very different. I don't know, just different worlds, right? But there's fascinating overlaps to notice, um, and that's why that's news that I wanted to. If anyone's interested, I just got a job teaching middle school religion class this year. So I think middle school is actually, yeah, it's too young to read fruitfully Chesterton and Lewis. I think that would be too hard for them, except of course for the Narnia books, right? Things like that. But the actual theological works, you might say, or apologetic works of Chesterton and Lewis would be actually, I think, too complicated for the kids. But I find that with high schoolers, right, using Chesterton is actually a great way to introduce them to some of these ideas that these other academic theologians like Balthasar and Ratzinger speak about, to kind of prime them, to set them up for college level, you might say, and reading some of these guys. But yeah, so I got this job teaching 5th and 6th grade this year, and I'm both nervous and excited. because this is my first time doing something like that. I've done something similar in the past, but that was a long time ago. So I've been preparing a whole bunch of syllabi. I have a whole bunch of material that I've been kind of organizing. And I already teach, uh, lead, I guess you could say, several OCIA sessions on Sundays. And because in OCIA you have a lot of people who are joining the church for the first time because they're curious and they actually don't know very much at all about the faith. You really do start very basic, even with these adults, right? Obviously, you don't come off as condescending, but at the same time, you have people who come and they don't really know who Abraham is or who Moses is, right? So you really do have to start at the basics. So I try to find that right balance when I teach OCIA of not sounding condescending like I'm teaching children, right? But also of keeping things very, very, very basic and simple and introductory, right? And I find that a lot of the material that I've created over the last few years for OCIA translates very well with some changes into syllabi for middle school. Turns out, again, that might sound like I don't know, a little condescending, but it's not. It really is not. I think the kids are curious enough, and the adults, I just the way you present is really what matters, I think. But anyway, I love teaching, and so I'm just so excited, but also a bit nervous. So we'll see. Um, Thanks, James. Congrats on the new job. You'll do amazing. I really appreciate that. I hope so. Please pray for me. Okay. Last book I read. This one I read either end of May or early June. So before it's a small book, right? But I really liked it. I mean, it's mind blowing, and in fact, I'm going to be using it for a project I'm working on. Um, Very helpful and very insightful. But there was a part at the end that I mean, I don't, I'm nobody, right? So anytime I disagree with a theologian, usually it's because I agree more with another who disagrees with him, right? Not because, you know, oh, I think I got it right. But I found myself disagreeing with him at the end, right? But it was nonetheless like one of the most insightful small treatises on the interrelationship of Christology, Mariology, and ecclesiology, right? Anyway, I'll just show you what it is. It's called Christ, Our Lady, and the Church by Yves Congar. It was very, very, very good, and I'm going to be using it and quoting it for a project I've been working on for a long time. But at the end, and I don't know if I can get into it, but at the end, I felt myself disagreeing with him on uh, the role of Mary. Um, the role of Mary in the mystery of our union to Christ, you might say. And the reason why I disagree with him on that is because I mean he kind of downplays the some of the arguments made for the role of Mary in our union to Christ that, to be fair to him, right, were made by people in a rather I don't know, not the best way, if that makes sense. And so I can totally sympathize with his reticence to accept some of the arguments he was talking about by some Catholics. I know this is very vague and abstract. You have to read the book, honestly. But long story short, it's based off of my readings of several parts of de Lubac's book on the Church and Ratzinger's book on Mary. I found myself disagreeing a little bit with Congar at the end of this book, but especially in the beginning. I mean, just incredible stuff. Like, it's a very short book too. Kungar is definitely someone to be reckoned with. I mean, he's a serious, serious thinker. But yeah, I didn't really like the end. Not that I didn't like it. I just thought that he missed something that I think Ratzinger definitely gets, and de Lubac. So yeah, that's Kungar. That was a good one. Okay, so obviously I'm making my way through this one. I have not finished it yet, right? This Maurice Blondel, look how big this is. A Philosophical Life. I have about 200 pages left, and that's why I haven't read that many books in the last 2 months. I've been just chipping away at this one. But also I had to go to a wedding out of state for a few days, which was absolute blast. Spend some time with some friends in the mountains in Wyoming. It was just beautiful. And in a Airbnb. It was just absolutely amazing. Got to meet some wonderful people. It was just great. Where's my cursor? There we go. A contemplative reader. You say I haven't read Kungar. I like Mary, Church at the Source by Ratzinger and Balthasar. Yeah, no, I totally love that book by Ratzinger and Balthasar. Um, no, Kungar is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, like he's a serious writer. Like he's a must, right? I think he's a very insightful. I read his book on the meaning of tradition, which is kind of a summary of his larger books on tradition. He's known as being the tradition guy. He draws a lot from Blondel for that. So Kungar is definitely a serious writer. I think um, there's a little bit of an anti uh Baroque sentiment in Congar that's interesting, a little excessive, I would argue. But I mean, honestly, there's a anti-Baroque stand in my own thinking, not as extreme. I'm much more willing to, synthesize and accept. I mean, I'm nobody. I'm just saying, like, um, I much prefer like the great scholastics, you know, the great fathers, and then the greats of modern time, like Newman, Muller, Scheeben, things like that. But I don't know, like I really don't like Suarez or some of the commentators like Jonas Cajetan, Jonas St. Thomas. They have some good stuff, right? But like I don't know, it's just I get a little bored. I'm gonna be honest, but I'm trying to overcome some of that. Okay, so I've been working on translating this book series for um for just to have them in English. I grew up with this book series, so I think the first book came out either in 2001 or in 2003. It's a French series. It's fantasy, technically speaking, much in the vein of Tolkien, right? But it's written for young adults, I guess you could say, teenagers, right? Mostly teenagers. But sometimes how like you have these books that are written for teenagers, um, and yet they're just as enjoyable by adults, right? I think that good example, Lord of the Rings. It's just one of those weird books where I can't tell if it's written for like 20 to 25 year olds, or if it actually is for like high schoolers. I think it's more for adults, honestly, but it's just it kind of defies categories, honestly. Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's like horror, it's like uh, you know, epic fantasy, obviously, but like I mean, there's in Tolkien, there's a combination of genres. There's romance, there's um, I don't know. It's just a strange book in like a beautiful way. But anyway, I'm getting off track. So this book series is very much a fantasy for teenagers, but it's got a certain poetry to it, a certain philosophical feel, right? It's a bit existential, beautifully written, very, very well developed characters. Um, and ultimately, I mean, this author is a master with words in the French language. It's hard to translate in a way that conveys the beauty of the French, but I'm doing my best with tools at my availability. Anyway, it's a book series that is not known in the English speaking world because it just doesn't exist in English. So you're not going to know what it is, I don't think. But I just remember enjoying it so much as a child, as a teenager. I just loved it. So as a early teenager and high schooler, I just loved it so much um, that I remember actually uh, as I was hiking in the French boarding school with a friend of mine, I actually narrated the entire series to him during our long hikes. So in one of the boarding schools I went to in France, right, it was kind of like a Boy Scout boarding school. We went on these camps, right, where we would hike for like one of the camps once a year. We'd hike for 2 weeks every day, right, except on Sunday where we had a break. But we would hike for basically 12 days of hiking all day, right? And so there was not much to do, right, other than contemplate the beauty of the nature uh, surrounding us in France, right? We went hiking in different places near the sea on the west coast. Sometimes, near the south of France. We went to the Alps for a few camps, but those weren't the long summer camp. Anyway, a lot of hiking, and so I would just narrate the story to my friend, just go over the whole thing, and he was just so interested in the story. And anyway, it's just been one of those books that really, one of those series that really marked me as a kid. So I'm translating it now, just so I can have a copy in English, so I can lend it. I'm gonna print it. I'm gonna bind it myself, like a homemade book, and I can lend it to people, and then they have to give it back to me, and because I can't sell this or anything. Anyway, it's called. This is the all three of them in one. The first series is called La Quête d'Ewilan. Um, I guess one way to translate the title would be Evelyn's Quest. Um, and there's the second trilogy, which is Le Monde d'Ewilan, which is the worlds of Evelyn. And then the third trilogy is Le Pacte des Marchombres, which just means the pact of the Shade Walkers is kind of how I translated it. And then a final trilogy, which seems to not be related, but spoiler alert, it ends up being related, is called L'autre, which just means the other. Um, anyway, long story short, it's this young girl who accidentally falls into a different world, a different dimension, and discovers that she has the capacity to bring into reality what she imagines in her mind. Uh, sounds very childish, I know, but hear me out. It's actually incredibly creative the way he goes through this capacity to bring into reality what the character imagines and other characters as well. And he develops this whole like system, you might call it, right? But suddenly you realize that what's happening is that the author himself has imagined all of these things and brought them into reality in these books for you to love and cherish, right? And so there's like all these different dimensions to this story, which just captivated me as a kid, right? Where I'm sharing in, it's very Tolkien-esque actually. In fact, Tolkien was a huge influence on this author. Um, uh, Tolkien's essay on fairy stories as well, and The Lord of the Rings especially really influenced this author. His name is Pierre Bottero, and he yeah, so it's really about the poetry of the imagination, is one way I'd put it, and it's it's very French, right? It starts in France, and the people in this other world speak French, and there's a medieval feel to it. There's a fantastic feel, like fantasy feel, but it's very, very poetic, and he writes beautifully, and there's this kind of angst to it, right? But it's very existential. There's a search for freedom, a search for self-expression. It sounds a little bit like Jean-Paul Sartre, right? But it's not like the French existentialist insofar that he actually gets into this really interesting. He talks about in order to truly be free, you need to be disciplined and set restrictions on yourself, right? And you need to be in harmony with the world and with others, right? So it's quite good. It's quite good, very poetic. Um, yeah. So and I moved to the United States in 2007, and I still was ordering his books, right? Through the internet or was it the internet? I don't know how at the time. I don't remember how exactly. It was the yeah, the internet was up and running for sure, but was Amazon working in 2007? Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But the point though is that in 2009, I read an article that said that the author had died in a motorcycle crash. And I just remember in 2009, how old was I? I think it must have been 16, 17 years old. I remember just being so sad. Because like he had built up his whole, all his trilogies, and there was these unanswered questions, right? So that's actually kind of appropriate. It shows you the kind of unendedness of the work of the imagination, you might say. But he died in 2009 of a motorcycle accident. He was 45 years old, and it was devastating to me. I was looking forward to everything this guy was writing. So anyway, so there's that kind of adds to the nostalgia, right? And to the bittersweet aspect, you might say, of this trilogy. So anyway, I'm almost done translating the first part of the first book. Each book comes in two parts, and I'm gonna try and share it with some friends. So those are the books I've read the last 2 months. I'm almost done with the Blondell book, 200 more pages, and I've been working on some translations. And so, let's see, we're in June. No, we're in July. Sorry, so July, August. So probably beginning of September, I'll make another video telling you guys what I've read in those 2 months. I'm probably not going to read as much because I'm going to the Catholic Creator Conference at the end of July, and after that, and that's about 4 or 5 days. And after that, I'm going to Rome for a whole week, which I'll keep you guys posted on that. That's going to be something else. And then I'm back, and then there's meetings at the school for teachers. So that's going to take up my time. And then end of August, I'm starting classes. So I'm going to be very busy, but I'll try to keep up with this stuff as much as I can. Channel and getting some guests on and stuff like that. Um, so that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Those of you who support, thank you very much. Those of you who are subscribed and who um, are notified for the videos and watch them faithfully, I am very, very grateful. It helps the channel get the word out about some of this beautiful theology from the great Catholic theologians of the 20th century, as well as some good literature here and there. All right, if you like this stuff, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Consider supporting me at patreon.com/logos project. You can go to my website if you want to sign up for a course in ecclesiology or Mariology or other things, but those are my two favorites. Theecclesiablog.com. And James, when am I in Rome? Oh, heck yeah. You'll be there end of July, early August. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm flying out on the 27th of July. I have to double check though. And I also think I'm coming back on the 4th of August, but I don't know. It's on my phone, but I think that's right though. So yeah, shoot me an email or something. Maybe we can meet up. All right, I'm going to tune out, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate everybody that likes, subscribes, and that watches faithfully. God bless everybody.